You know, kids, once upon a time there was this toy company that called themselves LJN, Maker of Toys, and they made quite a few successful toy lines for the most part. Kind of successful. I don't know. I don't care. However, sometime around the 1980s, they decided to add another item to their resume, and that's publisher of licensed video games. And here are some of those licensed games right now, on an ironing board. Yes, I know. LJN published games have a rather notorious reputation of being video games of poor quality. Now, admittedly, that's a bit of a stretch because some LJN published games are actually pretty decent. They're not great, but they're still decent, they're widely playable. But then we get to some of the games that are actually below par and deserving of all the scorn that they received. And we're going to be looking at one of those today. Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six for the NES. And there's that lovely Rainbow of Death on full display.
Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Without question, this game is the stereotypical licensed LJN published horse manure that serves only to reinforce the reputation that many games from the same brand share, whether it's deserved or not. The developer of this wonderful game, by the way? Bits, who were coincidentally responsible for the two sequels to The Amazing Spider-Man for Game Boy, which was another game that I thought was pretty decent. Coincidentally enough, Amazing Spider-Man was the only game of that Game Boy trilogy that wasn't conceived by Bits, but rather by Rare. I bring this up because the two sequels that Bits did produce are rubbish, quite frankly, and therefore it serves as an omen to what to expect from this game, Return of the Sinister Six. For example, the inverted controls. The B button jumps while A button attacks, which is probably the easiest way to turn off most players that are used to A button jumping, B button attacks, which is the prevalent control scheme for a great majority of side-scrolling action games or platformers on the NES in general. There are seldom few reasons to mess with a formula that works. This game offers none. Generally speaking, it's not a crippling matter, but it does contribute to the extensive shopping list of issues that impede this game somewhat. Among these issues are somewhat spotty attacks. Pressing the A button will allow you to perform a simple punch attack or a jumping kick attack that will propel you forward somewhat. These issues lie in the fact that these attacks seemingly come out at random, and you could try all you want to fiddle with the D-pad in a vain attempt to pull off a punch, but end up performing a kick attack which moves you forward and possibly in the line of fire. It might be dependent on whether you tap or hold the button, but again, it ends up being completely random. It also doesn't help matters that these moves have rather spotty collision detection, as the aforementioned jumping kick will oftentimes pass through an enemy without actually registering a hit. Fortunately, you'll be able to pick up web cartridges that will net you 10 projectile shots that somehow damages your enemies and even cause them to explode, which is truly a work of genius. It's too bad you can't control whether to shoot or kick. I also found it difficult to perform a meager task such as climbing a rope. Any competent game would allow some leeway for you to grapple onto a ladder while in midair or something like that. This isn't the case with Sinister Six, as you have to align yourself at a specific hotspot in order for the game to recognize that you're near a climbable section of the level. And when you jump off a rope or a ladder type object, you can't latch onto another while in mid-jump. You know, I can sort of understand if you program certain walls to be unclimbable, but not to be able to jump from one rope to another. Oh well, give them some credit at least. The web slinging is competent if aggravating. While holding down B in midair, you could press A to shoot a web line, and then you could just swing about if your line happens to stick to something. Considering that you'll be mostly running through narrow corridors or climbing ladders, or trying to climb ladders, or dodging missiles, the web slinging seems almost pointless, especially since it can be difficult to follow up one web line with another. However, making use of momentum while swinging back and forth on a web line can be used to allow you to reach higher platforms once you get the nick of it. Setting aside these control issues, Spider-Man boasts 6 levels. Some of these are straightforward, going from point A to point B, but sometimes you'll need to pick up an item to progress further in a level. For example, this sewage warehouse requires you to pick up some dynamite and a detonator to blow up this block that stands out from the rest of the level because it's a different color. I guess Spider-Man hates color. Can't say I blame him. Or can I? That sucked. I'm sorry, that sucked. Let's move on. Generally speaking, you could simply breeze through the early levels without killing everybody in a level. However, every 1,000 points will reward you with an extra health point, as indicated in the small meter on the top left corner of the screen, and this is pretty much your only means of recovering health, as your meter does not refill between stages, and there are no health power-ups of any kind to be found throughout the game. A tall order considering the immense challenge ahead of you as a result of the spotty control issues. Also, it should be noted that you only have 1 life per game and only 1 continue. This means you have a total of 2 tries to attempt to conquer the game, and once both tries are exhausted, it's time to take a hike. And taking a hike in this environment is probably your best bet. The visuals and overall presentation of Spider-Man Return to the Sinister Six aren't the worst on the system, but they're also uninspired. The environments and level design are drab, dull, and lifeless. Only a few colors, repetitive tiles, and oftentimes simplistic backdrops. Only time there seems to be life is outdoors, and that's only because there's a nice variety of buildings outdoors. Alas, even they succumb to the depressing levels of mehness. I'm not even sure that's a word. Whatever, let's go with it. As for the characters, Spider-Man looks average, the bad guys look like crap, and animation is nothing special. Oh, and everything likes to explode in this game. Missiles, people, everything. Well, everything except Spider-Man. He just passes out from boredom when he dies. Honestly, I don't blame him. On the bright side though, the intermission sequences look competently done. They're nice, colorful, almost akin to bad 90s comic book art. Given the time this was originally released, it's highly appropriate, I suppose. So now we get the sound in Spider-Man. Yeah, there's only about 5 or 6 music tracks in the entire game, more or less, and only a couple of them play during actual gameplay. Regardless, all of these tracks are repetitive, droning auditory nightmares that make me long for the sweet, elegant, and masterful soundtrack of Bram Stoker's Dracula on the same system. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch, but still, the music in this game is not that great. And I'm probably being generous with that statement. The sound effects are somewhat minimal, only a few of them actually exist, and some of them sound more like scratchy noise things than anything that's supposed to resemble, well, anything. Just terrible. Overall, Spider-Man Return to the Sinister Six is a Nintendo game that falters quite heavily in the gameplay department. If the terrible controls and questionable collision detection doesn't do you in, the subpar sound, drab visuals, and overall dull design will. While it's a relatively short game with only 6 levels of play, the game is such a boring experience that it ultimately feels longer. And when you only have 2 tries to beat the game and yet aren't given any incentive to actually instill any kind of effort to actually conquer whatever challenge exists in the game, outside of staying conscious, that in itself is quite a feat if you manage that throughout the 6 levels, and it only serves to lower the play value of this game even further, and ensure its fate as a poorly conceived video game that players will not be making any returns to. It is truly unfortunate that Spider-Man never got another NES outing, because he truly deserved a much better video game than what he got here. Don't bother with this one.